So, welcome. It is a great pleasure to invite Professor Konstantinos Vafiadis to moderate today's session entitled Connectivities in Art and Culture. Professor Vafiadis is an expert on late Byzantine painting. He teaches Byzantine art history at the Ecclesiastical Academy of Athens, Department of Cultural and Ecclesiastical Objects. He's also director of the Academy of Theological and Historical Studies of Holy Meteora. Professor Vafiadis has published a number of important books and articles on murals, icons, illuminated manuscripts, and painting manuals. Among these works, I find particularly significant his monograph on late Byzantine painting and the evolution of Constantinopolitan art from Comnenian to Paleologan and post-Byzantine times. Geographically, his research covers mainland Greece, the Aegean, and Cyprus, focusing on the history and culture of monastic centers, including Mount Athos and Meteora. Today we host 4 papers by distinguished archaeologists and art historians. I would like to remind everyone to keep the stipulated time frame, which is 15 minutes for each paper, and half an hour general discussion at 5 o'clock London time, 7 o'clock Athens, Nicosia time. So I hand over to Professor Vafiadis. The floor is yours.
Dear Bishop Valandis, dear colleagues and speakers and participants, I'm very happy to be with you. I would like to thank first the organizing committee for the invitation and the honor of being chair of this session. I'm so grateful to you all. So it's time to start, respecting the time limits, and I invite my friend, Dr. Haralambos Kojakoglou, to talk about art and hesychasm in Latin rural Cyprus. Haralambos, please.
Thank you very much. So, thank you also very much for your attendance, and I'll start right away in order not to waste time. My topic is art and hesychasm in Latin ruled Cyprus. Cyprus maintained close ties with Constantinople throughout the Paleologan era, although under Latin dominion, as the presence of Constantinopolitan artists on the island proves. In regard to the art in Cyprus during the Paleologan period, it has been argued in some earlier studies that contacts between the island and Constantinople dwindled considerably or were suspended. Hence, art in Cyprus developed almost autonomously. This view derived from the theoretical approach that since the Byzantine Empire failed to liberate Cyprus, the latter followed a course that was intertwined with the Frankish character of its kingdom. New critical editions of historical sources, modern publications of Cypriot wall paintings, and their increasingly in-depth research and study refute this theoretical assumption, as will be demonstrated below. Furthermore, the strength and impulse of Paleologan art in Cyprus influenced even the art of the Frankish aristocracy. The hesychast controversy in Byzantium best illustrates the close ties of Cyprus with other Byzantine centers. As corroborated by known facts, the dispute between Parlaam of Calabria and Gregory Palamas coincided with the turbulence caused by interdynastic rivalries between the Paleologi and the Cantacuzeni in Byzantium, and consequently, doctrinal issues were identified with political conflicts and took a totally new spin in Cyprus. The local council of Constantinople, convoked in 1341 by Andronicus III Paleologos, in the presence of the ecumenical patriarch John XIV Kalekas, condemned Varlam for erroneous doctrines. Due to the sudden death of the emperor, the acts were not signed, and therefore the council reconvened a while, June to August 1341, presided over the Grand Domestic John VI Cantacuzenios, and concluded with the condemnation of the beliefs of Varlaam and Gregory Akintinos. Patriarch John XIV Kalekas, acting as regent for the underage emperor, John V Paleologos, opposed the initiative of Cantacuzenios to chair the council, considering that the Grand Domestic arrogated to himself the imperial privilege of the minor emperor, who was now represented by the Patriarch himself. This dispute deepened since, in hindsight, both Cantacuzenios on the one side and Patriarch John Kalekas in collaboration with the mega dukes, Alexios Apokafkos on the other, were interested in seizing power until the emperor reached adulthood. Kantacousinos took refuge in Didimotichon, a town in the Thracian region, where the army and members of the nobility proclaimed him emperor, instigating the outbreak of civil war between 1341 to 1347 between Kantacousinos and the Paleologi. Palamas' support to Kantacousinos was seen by Patriarch John Kalekas as enmity towards the legitimate underage Emperor John V Paleologos and the people who exercised power on his behalf, so he turned against the Athonite abbot. In order to confront Palamas, John Kalekas resorted to the assistance of the competent Gregory Akindinos, whom he had ordained despite his condemnation at the Council of 1341. In this effort, he also joined forces with the Bishop Ignatios, who had just been elected new patriarch by the Synod of the Patriarchate of Antioch and had traveled to Constantinople to present himself before the emperor and to be approved. John Kalekas recognized Ignatios as Patriarch of Antioch and with his support convened a council that ended in the imprisonment of Palamas, who had been accused of heresy. Simultaneously, he had supported the elections of Hyakinthos of Cyprus as Archbishop of Thessaloniki, who until then had led a monastic life in the monastery of Odigon in Constantinople and was destined to become a merciless persecutor of the Palamites. The ecumenical patriarch and the ruling dynasty of Constantinople, whose assistance with their liberation from the Franks was eagerly anticipated by the Cypriots, considered Kantacousinos a usurper of Paleologi power and the main proponent of the heretic Palamas. The Cypriot origin of the anti-Palamite Archbishop of Thessaloniki, Hyakinthos, and the close relations he maintained with the anti-Palamites Gregory Akindinos and Nikephoros Grigoras, as well as George Lapithis of Cyprus, close friend and admirer of the later two respectively, must have played a pivotal role in propagating this view across Cyprus. On the other hand, the King Hugh IV of Cyprus had many more reasons than the anti-Palamite stance of the Roman Catholic Church alone to oppose the supporter of Palamas, John Kantacousinos, and encourage or support an anti-Palamite attitude in his kingdom. Conferring in 1241 the title Lord of Fere on Guy of Lusignan, known later also as Constantine II, King of Lesser Armenia, first cousin of Hugh IV, Kantacousinos had affiliated himself with the only person who could lay serious claims to the throne of Cyprus, and was most likely the legitimate heir to the kingdom after the death of Henry II of Lusignan in 1324. It is characteristic that Kantacousinos referred to Guy as the son of the king of Cyprus, although his father Amaury II, who died at 1310, and uncle of Hugh IV, had not officially become king of the island, but served as its governor and rector for life. Also noteworthy is the fact that King Hugh IV participated actively in the coalition forces of the Pope, the Venetians, and the Hospitaller Knights in the capture of Smyrna, 1344, against Umur, the Ottoman emir of Aydin. Umur was a close ally of Kantacousinos during the armed conflict with the Paleologi, the Serbs, and the Bulgars. It appears that his attitude towards Kantacousinos changed when he seized the throne of Constantinople in 1347. Pope Innocent VI asked for the assistance of the King of Cyprus, Hugh IV, in order to carry out Kantacousinos' desire for his conversion to the Roman Catholic faith and the restoration of the communion between the Ecumenical Patriarchate and Rome. In fact, in 1356, Pope Innocent VI asked the King of Cyprus, Hugh IV, the Doge of Venice, the Grand Master of the Hospitallers of Rhodes, and the Governor of Genoa, to send military aid to John V Paleologos, who in the meantime had joined the Catholic Church. Despite the few references against hesychasm in Cyprus, it is highly probable that any kind of Cypriot support of the anti-Palamites stemmed from the relations with and the obeisance of the Greek bishops of Cyprus to the anti-Palamite spirit of the Ecumenical Patriarchate during the time when John Kalekas held office, and the contacts of the Cypriot Archbishop of Thessaloniki, Hyakinthos, with his birthplace. Even though the texts sent by the anti-Palamites to George Lapithis and evidently to clergymen of Cyprus have not been highlighted so far, the recovery of the Codex 29 of the Archbishopric of Cyprus, dated to 1592, which contains the speeches, logi, of Grigoras against Gregory Palamas, indicates the consignment of such texts to the island. That the Roman Catholic Court of Cyprus incited the anti-Palamite movement as an expression of their attitude against Cantacousinos should be considered certain and the main reason for accommodating non-Cypriot anti-Palamites on the island. For example, Ignatius, Patriarch of Jerusalem, the Archbishop of Sidi, John Kiparissiotis. References in sources confirm that by the time Cantacousinos ascended the throne of Constantinople in the mid of the 14th century, the anti-Palamite attitude on Cyprus had reached its culmination. Nevertheless, we ought also to take into serious consideration the references that attest to the presence of pro-Palamites on the island, mainly because this information comes from the anti-Palamite function, for example, from Lapithis. Simultaneously, the usual attempt of Palamite circles to present the anti-Palamites with a pro-Latin disposition does not seem to be invariably confirmed, with the examples of Nikephoros Grigoras, George Lapithis, and the anti-Palamite primates of Antioch and Sidi being characteristic, as they sought refuge. Me ακούτε?
Yes, yes.
Yes. As they sought refuge in Cyprus, but were not Latinized, like Balaam of Calabria. In the case of George Lapithis, his liturgical treatise of the Seven Sacraments was preserved and was later included in the correspondence of the Ecumenical Patriarch Jeremias II to the Lutheran theologians of Tübingen. In around 1401-1402, the anti-Palamite former Ecumenical Patriarch John Kalekas wrote about the spread of Palamite theology across Cyprus, while in a letter dated around to 1401, the Constantinopolitan anti-Palamite scholar Manuel Kalekas states that the Cypriots were hostile to any anti-Palamite person. Yet, from later references, from the 16th century maybe, we know that Palamas enjoyed a great deal of respect in Cyprus and that his works were copied on the island. However, despite these scarce references to the pro-Palamites on Cyprus, until now we were incognizant of the dissemination of Palamite texts across Cyprus, apart from the epistle, which is dated around 1346-1348 of Joseph Καλόθετος, πρόστινας μοναχούς ελθόντας εκ Κύπρου και ζητήσαντας απλό λόγο μαθήν, addressed to some monks who came from Cyprus and requested to learn in a plain matter, and the letter of the Emperor John VI Cantacousinos, monk Ioasaph at that time, to the Bishop John of Carpassia. Interesting evidence can also be gained from research in the content of the surviving Cypriot manuscripts. The Cypriot Codex Vaticanus Palatinus Graecus 367 preserves an undated letter addressed to the abbot of the monastery titled Pros Ησυχαστήν, to Hesychast. The content of this letter corroborates the reference to hesychasm and mental prayer. The Cypriot Codex Panagia Kamariotis 44, dated between 1331 and 1335, written by Vasilios Herodiakon from Zodia, and Codex Panagia underlines the Orthodox views regarding the Filioque controversy and proceeds to the anathema of the non-Orthodox, while the Cypriot Codex Panagia Kamariotissa 22, written in 1551, not only repeats the views of the previous manuscript regarding Filioque, but also anathematizes Barlaam and Akindinos. One of the most impressive bits of evidence of the pro-Palamite activity is included in the unpublished Miscellaneous Codex Kitiu 19. So I'm sharing now. And it's dated to the 14th century, which was in possession of the monastery of St. George Oritis, Aiu to Oriti, in Cyprus, according to a handwritten note on its first folio. The Codex, I don't know if you see the Codex, includes the Nomocanon of Matthew Vlastaris, a 14th century writer well known for his pro-Palamite views and doctrinal texts regarding anti-Latin treatises, addressed even to the members of the Lusignan house. One of the most important texts of this codex for our study is an extract on folio 419 to 421, which contains a part of the Synodicon of Orthodoxy. which takes into consideration the decrease of the Palamite councils in the midst of the 14th century and anathematizes Barlaam of Calabria and Gregory Akintinos. This codex shows similarities with the above-mentioned Cypriot Codex Panagia Kamariotis 22 after 1551, which contains the same text. Furthermore, a Codex 29 of the Archbishopric of Cyprus, dated to the 16th century, preserves Palamas text on the essence energies theology. An intriguing theory maintains that the period in question saw the spread of the Cypriot tradition that concerns a cave in Pissouri near Limassol, later integrated into a church decorated with wall paintings, which holds that this cave was the one in which Prophet Elijah, a key figure of Palamite teaching, spent time as an ascetic. A monumental representation of the prophet Elijah next to the episode of the Transfiguration is found among the art of the late 15th century in Cyprus in a rare iconographic program on the northwest squinch of the Church of Antiphonitis in Kalogrea. The question of the procession of the Holy Spirit, Filioque, remained crucial until the end of the Latin rule on Cyprus. Even though the historical sources do not interpret sufficiently the stance of the Greek Church of the island, research into the few preserved Cypriot manuscripts reveal interesting aspects. The Codex 14 of the Archbishopric of Cyprus, dated to the 15th century, contains the copy of the text titled «Περί ανασκευής Λατίνων, περί εκπορεύσεως, περί αποκοπής διπτύχων της Ρώμης και στέρησης πρωτείων περί σχίσματος Ρώμης», on the confutation of the Latins regarding the procession of the Holy Spirit, on the denunciation of the diptychs of Rome, and the denial of the papal primacy on the schism of Rome. In the same library, the Miscellaneous Codex 34, also from the 15th century, includes anti-Latin texts by Mark of Ephesus, the well-known Evgenikos, contemporary with the time of their transcription, passages of the Council of Ferrara Florence, and the letter by which its decisions were later rejected by the Synod in Constantinople. Additionally, another codex, Codex 36, dated in the 16th century, contains a narration of the Council of Florence, which Codex 40 of the same library, with its anti-Latin speeches, is enlightening mainly on the monastic and some bishopric circles for which these manuscripts were probably intended. All the above find their visual expression predominantly in the monumental art of Cyprus. They are classified in categories revealing the Paleologan style as well as the new iconographic themes of the later Byzantine art and their transplantation to Cyprus with doctrinal inferences. Subjects inspired by the Filioque issue include the depiction of the Ancient of the Days in the representation of the Annunciation or other representations as the one that you see here, where the elderly person is identified as Jesus Christ according to the Orthodox approach, and not as God the Father, according to the Roman Catholic belief based in Thomas of Aquino writings. Concurrently, the widespread depicts, you can see also other representations, where we have here the representation on the upper here, you see, we have an elderly person with the inscription Jesus Christ, and at the same time, the Ancient of the Days, which is according to the Orthodox approach and not to the Roman Catholic, which identifies the elderly person with God Father, not Jesus Christ, not Logos. Other cases that we see these examples are the Ancient of the Days in the Holy Cross Church in Platanistasa, in the presentation of crucifix, where in the upper part we see again these elderly persons with the cross nimbus, the cross nimbus, and nimbus which is reserved only for Jesus Christ.
Dear Karala, sorry, interrupt you. You have more 2 minutes.
Yes, I'm finishing.
Thank you.
The Ancient of the Days in another place here in the Old Hermitage in Suskew. The Ancient of the Days in the church, in the Holy Virgin Church of Pοδithou. Again, O Paleos των ημερών has an inscription. It is the elderly person with a cross-shaped halo. But we see it also in other churches, in other places, like in Greece. We see it here, for example, in the Holy Virgin of Olympiotissa, the same thing. In other places, like in Albania, in St. Nicholas in Berat. And we see that in icons in Russia, And I want to underline that at the same time, the widespread depiction of the 70 apostles, of saints born in the West, and popes, as the one you can see here, before the Great Schism of 1054, along with the portrayal of many saints of Cyprus among the co-officiating hierarchs of the apes, indicate on the one hand the ecumenical and synodical character of the Orthodox Church, and on the other the participation of Cyprus in this ecumenical ecclesiastical dimension that contradicts the notion of the papal primacy. The inscription on the scrolls of the co-officiating hierarchs that you can see here with the invocation to the Holy Spirit, as for example the case of the St. Nicholas of the Roof at Kakopetria, you can see here, illustrates the sanctification of the holy gifts in conformity with Orthodox teaching as opposed to the Roman Catholic scholastic view, according to which the invocation takes place after the Lord's sermon. In conclusion, the initiatives which Constantinople took in the ecclesiastical dialogue with Rome determined the attitude of the subdued Greek Church of Cyprus towards the Latin conquerors, denoting the adherence of the Cypriots to the Byzantine capital and their insatiable desire to be ecclesiastically and politically united with the Byzantine Empire. Painting and architecture have captured the fierce conflicts between the East and the West at a political and ecclesiastical level, acting as the artistic resistance of the Orthodox, particularly in the Latin-occupied territories of Byzantium as Cyprus. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear Haralabe. And now I call Dr. Tassos Papakostas to talk about beyond the Crusader states after the Byzantine Empire. I'm so sorry. Okay. After the Byzantine Empire, within the Venetian world, some thought of 16th century Cyprus, church buildings and monastic foundations. Dear Tassos, please.
Thank you. I assume you can see full screen slide, right?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. So let's go. Oops. Now, in my abstract, I promised to present a few examples of how the past was perceived and employed in Venetian ruled Cyprus, primarily through architectural solutions that illustrate a variety of contrasting approaches. The initial thought behind this goes as follows. If glances towards and uses of the past are taken for granted in late medieval and early modern Cyprus, not least in the spirit of trends emanating from Renaissance Italy, and are indeed detectable in historiography, scholarly endeavors, literary, artistic, and architectural action, what is the place of the Byzantine element in all this? By which I mean intentional references to awareness and promotion of the pre-Crusader traditions of Cyprus, stretching from late antiquity to the Comnenian era, when the island was ruled from Constantinople. Well, the short and quick answer is that these pages of the island's history are surprisingly absent, perhaps even little known in later centuries, even though their monumental, cultural, and religious heritage were all over the place. Let me begin by highlighting one crucial element of the architectural landscape, namely the survival and continuing use of important monuments and shrines from the Middle Byzantine centuries into this late period, the Venetian period. A few key examples are shown on the screen. These were popular and accessible shrines that attracted pilgrims and were constantly maintained, rebuilt, or refurbished. Later structures, erected in the period examined here in the sort of later 15th and 16th centuries, perpetuate schemes and modes elaborated during the Byzantine centuries, the Middle Byzantine centuries, be it in small vaulted and domed churches, or, in the case of mountainous regions, timber-roofed structures. In these cases, there is unbroken continuity within a long tradition that merges local with wider Byzantine elements. What stands out from this voluminous and largely rural output is a small number of elite buildings that defy these norms most blatantly and seem to display efforts to reconnect with the past in very peculiar ways. I will focus on two that best illustrate different approaches. They tell complex stories, and I wish to stress at the outset that I will only comment on very small parts of these stories. The first is the Catholicon of the Inglistra of Northwest Reclus, who established his monastic community in the outskirts of Paphos back in the 12th century. The new church was probably erected and decorated in the opening years of the 16th century. The architecture is nothing short of extraordinary within the local context, despite the fairly unremarkable status of the monastery itself in this period. To start with, in plan, it is a colonnaded three-aisle basilica, a scheme not used on Cyprus for almost a millennium, with the exception of the very different variants represented by the large urban churches of the Lusignan era. Although the roofing system, with masonry vaults in the dome, may be seen as traditional and more in line with the prevailing norms, the plain arcades appear to refer directly to the late antique tradition, their column capitals being rough imitations of Corinthian models. The latter must have been easily available among the nearby ruins of Paphos. The basilica plan, on the other hand, is more difficult to account for. As far as we can tell from the archaeological record, none of the numerous early basilicas of Cyprus was still standing in the 16th century, most having fallen in ruins much earlier or having been replaced by smaller vaulted structures in the intervening centuries. There is obviously a set of interlinked questions that arise here. How is this unprecedented reference to late antique models to be interpreted? How was it effected? And whose agency lies behind it? Well, potential clues may be offered by what we know from the written record about the monastic community in this period. There are two reported incidents which may shed some indirect light. First, the visit of the Patriarch of Constantinople, Jeremias, in late 1523, that is presumably shortly after the completion of the Catholicon, on his way to Sinai and the Holy Land, when he spent 2 weeks in the monastery, leaving a long-lasting impression on the community. The fact that the Patriarch and his retinue chose this particular monastery as their temporary abode, awaiting the irregular situation in Egypt to calm down in order to resume their journey, suggests prior links, perhaps, between the Inglistra and the entourage of the Patriarch. The second incident of relevance occurred a few years later. In 1537, the hegemon of the Inglistra was removed from office, accused before the Venetian authorities for having sent one of his monks to be ordained beyond the island shores by the Patriarch of Alexandria, and in contravention of the stipulations of the Bulla Cypria of 1260 that regulated matters of jurisdiction and relations between the Greek and Latin churches of Cyprus, as we heard yesterday. The hegemon defended his actions, making vague reference to the founder of his monastery, that is Neophytos the Reclus, and to the patriarchal and imperial status it enjoyed, a status confirmed by the kings of Cyprus, according to the hegemon. Through the voluminous and largely unpublished dossier of this case in the Venetian archives, we learn that the Inglistra maintained, or claimed to have had for a long time, close links with the Patriarchates of Antioch, Jerusalem, and Alexandria, all three, of course, under Mamluk and then Ottoman rule. I note here that such links and occasional interference of the mainland Patriarchates and ecclesiastical institutions in the affairs of Cyprus are also attested from a small number of other incidents involving ordinations, property claims, and liturgical matters. Could the architecture of the Inglistra Catholicon itself reflect this peculiar attitude of the monastic community? Well, I am unable to answer this question with any certainty at this point, but the fact remains that the basilical plan and plain column arcades recall the architecture of late antique churches, long lost on Cyprus, but still standing on the mainland, most notably the Justinianic Catholicon at Sinai. At the same time, one could look at such choices through the lens of all'antica architecture and the search for ancient models that was prevalent in contemporary Italy. The problem here, however, is first chronological and then contextual. Examples of all'antica architecture first appear on Cyprus only a few years before the construction of the Catholicon, in projects initiated by the Venetian authorities. For this trend of seeking antiquity through architecture to percolate into the buildings of the Greek church requires a substantial leap that would take decades to materialize. Let me now move on to my second case study. This is the Greek Cathedral of Nicosia, the Virgin of the Ytria, seat of the most important of the four Greek prelates of Cyprus, standing right next to the 13th century Latin cathedral. It is currently being investigated by a team under Michalis Olympios of the University of Cyprus, and what follows is based on that work. It is important to note here that by the middle of the 16th century, Nicosia was the most populous city of the overseas Venetian territories, and its Greek bishop was the most senior prelate physically present on Cyprus, considering that the Latin archbishops rarely set foot on the island. All this to stress that this is not a random Greek church, far from it. And neither is its architecture. The cathedral was reconfigured and refurbished several times in its long history, and the most comprehensive and protracted building campaign took place in the last years of the Lusignan kingdom and in the course of the Venetian period, most notably resulting in the elaborate north facade facing the Latin cathedral. What is immediately striking here, just as in the case of the Anglistra, is the equally spectacular departure from prevailing norms. The facade is clearly of Gothic inspiration, emulating details and reproducing elements from the neighboring Latin cathedral. One would have expected, perhaps, the Greek ecclesiastical authorities to wish to differentiate as much as possible their principal shrine from that of the sometimes antagonistic Latin church next door. Yet what we see here is the exact opposite. My contention is that the explanation must be twofold. It has to do with the patronage of this campaign and with very peculiar views of the past, once more. The building campaign seems to have been completed under the auspices of the Università, that is the Urban Council of Nicosia and its leaders. This is at least what the heraldic emblems over the main portal suggest. The Urban Council brought together members of the aristocracy and of the higher social strata in the city. Many of its members issued from old families that followed the Latin rites, but by the mid-16th century, when this heraldic composition was installed in the portal, most of its leadership consisted of representatives of families that rose to prominence more recently and were often members of the Greek church. This was a small and powerful group of individuals, well connected to the Venetian administration, cosmopolitan and outward-looking, often educated in Italy, mostly at Padua, unwaveringly loyal to Venice, and instrumental in the episcopal succession, with many candidates for the episcopal throne, issuing from the very same families represented in the council. Their attitude and background must have determined to some extent the architectural choices we see here. Turning to views of the past, presumably their views of the past. Here, the style that we now call Gothic obviously does not equal Latin, nor does it refer to the French origins of this architecture. Instead, it signifies local antiquity and prestige. The Latin cathedral, dedicated to the Holy Wisdom, was after all the most lavish and probably the oldest large church standing in 16th century Nicosia. By referring to it, the Greek cathedral is appropriating its perceived pedigree and its association with the old glorious days of the Byzantine kingdom that remained a constant point of reference in documents and petitions from this period pertaining to the confirmation or extension of various rights and privileges enjoyed or claimed by feudal lords, monasteries such as the Anglistra, or other institutions. The spirit is comparable to that detected at the Anglistra, a wish to reconnect and advertise associations with an idealized past, a past that makes sense in a very specific context for a particular audience. At the Anglistra, that audience was first and foremost the monastic community itself, with its ambitious mainland connections, and perhaps the faithful that visited the monastery. In Nicosia, the audience is much wider. It is the city's entire population, being offered a monumental reminder of the longevity of its ecclesiastical institutions. This is yet again very different from what we see in the state-sponsored projects of the period, which follow views of the past elaborated in Italy, and especially in Venice, with direct inspiration from the Roman past of the peninsula, that hold strong associations and mean something for the representatives of the Republic. So, time to return to my initial query and conclude. What these examples suggest is a variety of ways of engaging with the past, or at least a very targeted approach to it that made little or no direct reference to Constantinople and its traditions. Yet this same heritage, the Byzantine, the Constantinopolitan, was very much alive with the appropriation of rural ecclesiastical architecture, as we saw earlier. There was no need to revisit it, as it was always present. Yet for the secular urban elites of Nicosia, prestige and pedigree emanated not from such Byzantine traditions, but from the city's grandest monuments, linked to the days of the independent kingdom that preceded Venetian rule, and that, of course, nurtured the emergence and sustained the growth of these same elites. The Greek cathedral clergy presumably shared to some extent these same views. For the monastic community of the Anglistra, the point of reference was altogether different and more wide-ranging. It was linked with the Christian traditions of Syria-Palestine, its prestigious shrines, and its ancient ecclesiastical institutions. Yet the question of agency behind this remains unanswered in the case of the Anglistra. Is what we see here the product of an unknown architect's ingenuity, an undocumented patron's erudition, an ambitious hegemon's initiative, or something else? And I will leave you with this open question. Thank you.
Dear Tassos, we thank you for providing us with many information concerning the architecture of Cyprus. And now I invite my friend, Dr. Ioannis Iliadis, Director of the Byzantine Museum and Art Galleries in Nicosia, to speak about, sorry for my screen, okay, the Cypriot Renaissance painting of Cyprus. Ioannis? Ioannis? I can't hear you.
You are muted.
Okay, sorry. But I cannot move it back. I would like to thank the organizers for the honor to invite me to this virtual Byzantine colloquium. Cyprus, by the end of the 13th century, keeps up with the artistic developments that take place mainly in Constantinople, especially with the frequent contacts, the transfer of manuscripts and icons, but also the apprenticeship in workshops of the Byzantine capital, or by inviting artists from Constantinople to Cyprus. Evidently, any delay in the apprehension and adoption of the Paleologan art in Cyprus compared to other areas is brief. The Paleologan art that flourished in Constantinople, Thessaloniki, Epirus, Mistras, and the Balkans created figures and compositions infused with humanitarianism and classical thought. The animating lyrical character, but also the realistic rendering as much as possible of the figures and movement, imbued with plastic self-sufficiency, conveys the great emotions of the depicted figures. The beauty of the faces, the plastic clarity, and the vibrancy of the colors, the dramatic undertone, and at the same time the tranquil disposition become the main characteristics of the Paleologan art. This style, characterized by the attempt to depict the psychological disposition and the volume of the figures, the modeling of the faces with gradual transitions of tone, the harmonious combination of brilliant colors, and the soft modeling of the drapery, not only captivated the Greeks of Cyprus, but it became an artistic coine for the various ethnic groups as well as the aristocracy, as evidenced by the decorated monuments of Famagusta, the Royal Chapel at Pyrga, and elsewhere. Western art was already known in Constantinople as early as 1204, when some Latin churches were frescoed during the Latin occupation of the city. The oldest known evidence of a change of aesthetic position in the spiritual space of Byzantium is found in an ekphrasis of Manuel Paleologos in the early 15th century, when he enthusiastically analyzes the scene of spring on a Franco-Flemish carpet arazzo, which he saw in the Palace of the Louvre in Paris. The spirit of this new aesthetic of the intellectual environment of Constantinople relates to the values of Western art due to the frequent contacts embassies in search of military financial aid, culminating in the long stay in Italy for the work of the Ferrara-Florence Synod. No work strongly influenced by Western art has survived in Constantinople, except for a part of a mural depicting an unidentified figure in front of an enthroned Virgin and Child on the Arcosolium G in the monastery of Kora in Constantinople. The artistic production of this period also includes the cross of Bessarion's Savrothiki. The frescoes of Panagia Odigitria in Lefkada of the Florentine Tokos family are also connected with this current art in Constantinople. The frescoes of the church reflect the international post-Gothic style with influences from the chapel of the Scrovegni in Padua. The Venetian ruled Crete, already before the fall of Constantinople, presents an eclectic tendency in painting, as can be seen in the miniatures of the former Olski Apocalypse dating 1415 and in Western frescoes as early as the 14th century. During the period 1453-1526, the artistic production in Crete is focused on icons painting due to the increased need for export. The different demands of the new clientele, Orthodox and Roman Catholics, both on the island and in the West, obliged Cretan painters to enrich their compositions with representation of Western iconography. Ambidextrous painters create works such as the Dormition of Ephraim of Syria and the Birth of Christ, dating to the second half of the 15th century, with landscape backgrounds from post-Gothic art. In the Latin-ruled Rhodes and the Dodecanese in general, a rich artistic production is presented, the aesthetic trend of which is determined by the requirements of the sponsors and the recipients, who are sometimes Greeks and sometimes Latin. The painting of Rhodes is also influenced by the post-Gothic painting, but special attention is paid to the rendering of the architectural space, such as Agios Nikolaos in Trianda, while in the monastery of Taxiarchis Michael in Thari, two-story buildings are introduced. All these examples from Constantinople and other artistic centers failed to become Renaissance art, mainly because the influences were Gothic and the Byzantine art prevailed. In the first half of the 15th century, the circumstances improved for the subsequent Greek.
Sorry to interrupt you. Could you check the changes of slides? You are in the first slide. Your PowerPoint.
I see changing here.
No, we see the
What
first
can I do now?
one. Okay.
I'm moving them. I don't know what's happening.
Okay. Okay.
Now, do you see difference?
Yeah.
Do you see moving?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm sorry for the previous. In the first half of the 15th century, the circumstances improved for the subjugated Greeks of Cyprus. This resulted from a series of historical conjunctures, such as the increased influence of the Greek church following the Mamluk invasion and plundering of Cyprus, and the consequently mass withdrawal of many Latin authors. The equal status which the Greek and the Latin Church of Cyprus enjoyed as a result of the decisions of the Council of Florence, 1439, regarding the union of the churches. And third, the reinforcement of the Church of Cyprus by the Byzantine princess Helena Paleologina from Mistras, consort from 1441 of the King of Cyprus, John II of the House of Lusignan. Furthermore, according to the sources, the fall of Constantinople a few years later brought about an influx of Constantinopolitan refugees into Cyprus, whom Paleologina accommodated in her fiefdoms at Nicosia. In the second half of the 15th century, the Greek element was particularly favored with the gradual relaxation of the Frankish authority, the reduced oppression imposed by the Latin Church, and the secretive negotiations for the cession of Cyprus to the Serenissima. The Venetian rule of the island began in 1489, when the widow of King James II of Lusignan, Queen Caterina Cornaro, abdicated in favor of Venice. During this period, 1489-1571, Cypriot painters lived, studied, and worked in Venice and other towns of the Italian peninsula and in the Venetian territories and met the Italian Renaissance. Cypriot artists incorporate elements of Western art into their works, which they either know through illustrated manuscripts and paintings that arrive in the island, such as the diptych of Lefkonico, painted probably in Italy, or from sketchbooks they prepared during their travels to the West and especially to Venice. Easier for the artists of Cyprus, as the first source of acquaintance of the Western art are the Latin monuments of Cyprus, which were painted mainly during the 15th century, such as the Abbey of Belabais with Gothic quadrifoliate frames, proper perspective in the Last Supper of Latin Chapel at Pyrga, and realistic representation of people in the Pentecost of St. Kyrikos and the Ulyti in Letimbu. Paleologan art with proper perspective and dynamic representation in St. George of the Greeks. The religious situation on the island improved further during the Venetian rule, 1489-1571, because of the greater tolerance by the Venetians towards the Orthodox Church and the situation of compulsory coiling that is created by the more and more intense threat of the Ottomans against the island. Yearly sponsorships by the Venetians for the support of Greek monasteries is either money or basic goods, and the opportunity to buy nobility titles or high ranks of clergy is given to Greeks. And here you can see a fresco from Lambadistis showing a pope and a doge. In this historical context, the art of Cyprus begins to attain a new peak already in the first half of the 15th century, first slowly, then gradually at a higher level, and this art gains a high position in the Venetian period. This art has been called by scholars and researchers as Cypro Renaissance painting. Having as a base the Paleologan art and its achievements, it evolves within the cultural stream of the Italian art of the 15th century and its aesthetic guest, which derive from humanism theories. Characteristics of the new art are the perfect iconographic organization, the elaborate design, as well as the livelihood and the freedom that are also responsible due to the usage of new artistic means. The Cypro Renaissance style is in many painted churches all over Cyprus. The term Cypro Renaissance is related to the art historical term Renaissance, regarding the Italian art of the 15th century and the artistic orientation dissenting from contemporary humanistic theories. A great number of monuments and icons testify this artistic style all over the island. The painters are ambidextrous artists who can easily straddle between the Byzantine and Italian art of the Renaissance, with which the Cypriot painters were familiarized due to their contacts with Venice. Their art is marked by the vitality and the freedom which are readily available because of the use of new pictorial means, and is characterized by careful design and excellent iconographic layout. Among the churches of the highest aesthetic value of this style is the so-called Latin chapel of the monastery of St. John Lambadistis in Kalopanaiotis, and the churches of Virgin Mary Podithu in Galata, St. Barbara in Peristerona, Virgin Mary Iamatiki in Arakapas, and Virgin Mary Katholiki in Pelendris. The acknowledgement of Italian Renaissance and its achievements on behalf of the artists who decorated and the composition must be considered as granted, since these artworks were in a conscious attempt for perspective and depiction of the third dimension of the volume of figures and buildings. The coordinated attempt of the artist to apply the Western art perspective with the creation of a cube-like space so that the three-dimensional interior of the building is depicted consists of a novelty for the art of Cyprus. The structural organization of space, as well as the use of perspective, relates to the so-called first Renaissance of Masaccio and Beato Angelico. As mentioned before, the artworks of Cypriot Renaissance style are defined by the conscious attempt for a natural depiction of the volume of the figures. This contributes to the depiction of natural attributes of the figures in a way that the depiction is as accurate, natural as possible, and with a psychological study of the depicted figures, just as in the icon of St. John the Baptist, St. Peter, St. Thomas in the Byzantine Museum. The urge to bring out volume led to their depiction with soft garments and their drapery to define the body anatomy, like the Virgin in the Annunciation of Podithu. Often, these figures are positioned on marble Renaissance thrones, which give an air of grandeur to the whole composition, as seen on the two icons of the Enthroned Mary from Agios Dometios Church in the left, and the icon of the Enthroned Christ at the Byzantine Museum. The architectural structures are often depicted in a Renaissance one-point perspective, such as the case of the icon of Communion of the Apostles from the Virgin Mary Chrysalignotissa Church, and today in the museum in Nicosia. In Lambadistis, this spectacular pictorial set, which is adorned with the latest achievements in the art, such as illusionist configurations, virtual vaults in the ceiling and the window of the east wall, and decorative stripes with Italian motifs that fascinate with its rich alternation of colors, can remind of similar chapels in the West, such as the Slovenian chapel in Padua. At the same time, in Cyprus, evolves another artistic trend, the so-called Cypriot workshop, the post-Byzantine art of Cyprus with Western influences. This artistic style, even though is more progressive in adapting and transforming Western iconographical subjects into Byzantine, such as St. Anne holding Virgin Mary with child, and such as the icon from the Church of St. Anthony in Lefkosia. Imported iconography is also the westernized Man of Sorrows with Christ dead afore his sarcophagus, as it is apparent on the icon from St. Luke Church in Lefkosia, in a version that was mainly cultivated by Giovanni Bellini in Venice. Clearly of Western genre is also the Virgin Mary of the Gytria and Donors with a church from the Church of St. Cassianos in Lefkosia, 1529, which is a Byzantine interpretation of the iconographic type of Virgin Mary of Loreto. Other imported subjects are the depictions of the so-called westernized type of resurrection, raising of Christ from his sarcophagus, like in the fresco of Simeon Avxentis in St. Sozomenos in Galata. Clearly of Western derivation is also the iconographical type of Lamentation of Christ in the form of Pietà. In this style belongs the trend of painting Westernized Madonnas. The Madonneri icons were greatly distributed on the island and were mainly destined for the Latin Church of the island and for private usage as well. These are works with an intensive presence of Western iconographic elements and are found all over the Greek Orthodox areas. These numerous icons on Cyprus as well does not exclude the existence of a Madonneri workshop on the island that produced and traded icons with the rest of the Venetian ruled areas. Thank you very much for your attention.
We thank you, Ioannis, for your interesting paper. And it's time to invite Dr. Angeliki Liberopoulou, an expert in the art of the Venetian Crete, with the paper Metaphysical Connectivities in Eastern Mediterranean, Depictions of Heaven and Hell in Venetian Crete.
Hi, hello. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Yes, you can hear me, you can see me, but I cannot share my screen. Oh, no, share, sorry. I think, can you see this? I cannot see any of you, so.
Yes,
Is it full screen?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you so much. Right, I would like to thank the organizers, obviously, for this wonderful invitation. It's an honor and it has been great. But since I'm the last speaker and probably you all want to go, I'll try to be quick. So, Venetian Crete has always attracted scholarly attention. Following the sack of Constantinople to the troops of the Fourth Crusade in 1204, for the next 458 years, two ethnically, culturally, linguistically, and religiously different peoples were placed on the same land. Oh, sorry, I cannot move my screen. Now. Okay, got it, sorry. On the one hand, the native, medieval, Greek-speaking and Orthodox natives, on the other, the Venetian, Latino, Veneto-Italian-speaking Roman Catholic colonists were forced to cohabit and managed to find comprehensive ways of coexisting as reflected in the incredibly rich cultural heritage Venetian Crete has gifted to the European multinational identity. The Cretans initially resented and objected to being Venetian subject, the call of Constantinople in inverted commas, becoming even stronger after Michael VIII recaptured the capital in 1261. Venice was very well aware of the advantages the ruling over Crete offered for her trading ambitions. Hence, one side pushed, the other pulled, and this tug of war continued until 1453, when it is generally accepted that with the loss of the capital and the empire, the Cretans finally decided to review in a favored light Venice's stronghold. This is in a nutshell how Venetian Crete was viewed in literature, a tale of two halves, with 1453 marking a watershed moment. It is true that there's a distinct difference between these two periods on the island, but it mainly concerns the preferred medium of the artistic production. Up until 1453, we have a plethora of regional churches with incredibly rich wall paintings. After 1453, Cretan art became synonymous with a panel-painted icon. And it is this artistic development that eventually culminated to the art of El Greco. Socioeconomically, the two peoples have started converging well before 1453. In fact, already by the 14th century, cross-marriages and business transactions are documented. Inevitable loans spanning material culture, such as drinking glasses, Venetian drinking glasses found their place into representations of table layouts in Crete, fashion, such as the mi-parti, the party-colored garments, and also linguistic modifications like the famous zouraris, which is actually from the Latin usurer, for usurer, and they actually on Crete they actually transliterated in zuraris. They actually wrote it in Greek letters. And even uprisings that saw Greek and Venetians fighting side by side against the motherland, seeking to establish a Cretan autonomy and hence identity. The religious divide, however, remained a complicated and in times rather thorny issue. Religious identity could be a very strong dividing force when defined cultural groups that have been forced into coexist within defined cultural groups that have been forced into coexistence. Apologies. The bitter divide between Orthodox and Roman Catholic cannot be downplayed. There's certainly evidence that support this position also in regional Crete. And I'll show you here inscriptions where actually it is stated that these churches, they're two separate churches, were built and decorated and with money by Orthodox Christians. And this is important, we'll come back to that. What I would like to do is to assess this division by the available visual evidence and put forward that we need to add a little bit of water into our wine, to use a Greek expression, να βάλουμε λίγο νερό στο κρασί μας, or at best distinguish between official, in inverted commas, religious line and the sentiment of people who coexist and share everyday life experiences. There is a fundamental unifying ground for both sides of the Christian divide, and that is the shared beliefs of the Christian doctrine. One of the most fundamental shared beliefs is that being good in this life would be rewarded in heaven in the afterlife, while being bad meant insufferable suffering until the end of time. As I mentioned above, regional Crete was not void of hostile sentiment towards the Roman Catholic. Again, these inscriptions, these churches were built by money, money spent by Orthodox Christians. At the same time, there are certain facts that cannot be denied. Regional Crete had Venetian rulers positioned in a number of strategic locations. The Castellani, especially in Paleochora, which you see here on the bottom left, southwest Crete. Regional Crete also attracted non-native farmers and other laborers to work the land and take advantage of other working opportunities the Cretan landscape offer, like the great Charalampos Gasparis has demonstrated. Regional Crete was not particularly attractive to Catholic priests, who remained in numbers in their monastic foundations in the main cities in the north. In short, regional Crete had a Roman Catholic population in need of spiritual guidance, which was difficult to find and sustain. This led a number of Roman Catholics to frequent Orthodox churches and to share Orthodox Mass with the Orthodox native. And again, as mentioned above, the fact that certain native communities resented and resisted this development, again, you've seen it out many times, indirectly informs us and confirms that it was taking place. Further indirect evidence is provided by two separate decrees issued in Venice, one in 1349 and another in 1405, forbidding this practice. Decrees such as this, issued in a faraway land with no understanding of the reality of everyday life, have little, if any, effect, and this is evident already by the fact that the decree had to be reissued 56 years after the first. Although we did hear a lot about decrees in the excellent paper by Marina Koumanoudi yesterday, so I'm not going to go into decrees at all. Iconographic evidence also confirms the presence and or attendance of Roman Catholic in regional Cretan Orthodox churches. One of the best known examples is the presence of St. Bartholomew in two different Cretan churches with a substantial geographic distance between them, depicted holding his flayed skin over his shoulder. Right, so these are two churches. One is in Heraklion and the other is in Greece. And just to show you that the artist didn't think, oh, this is next door, lovely, I will copy it. The one church is here in Heraklion. I don't know if you can see my cursor, I just hope, and the other in Chania here, so quite far apart. This follows the Roman Catholic narrative of his martyrdom, as according to the Orthodox Church, the saint was crucified. In fact, I consider the gathering of the saints in the church of Agia Pelagia in Anovianos, with the three saints standing side by side so close to the sanctuary, as one of the best examples of religious connectivities Cretan monumental art has on offer. Another connectivity was the depiction of hell in the Cretan churches, some of which include Roman Catholic clergy, seen here to the right. Their presence was used as visual evidence that the Orthodox Cretans remained hostile towards the Venetians, and throwing the clergy into the fire of hell was a visual representation of this hostility. I have always argued against this position. It is true that Orthodox and Catholic could have received and interpreted such representations in a different way. For the Orthodox, the Catholic priests were heretics and shared the hellish space with other clergy who strayed from the path of the true faith, in inverted commas. For the Catholic, however, there was no reason to perceive this as a targeted hostile message. They were aware that their own clergy committed sins, which would have earned them a place in hell, in Dante's hell, to be more specific. Panagiotakis has argued that Dante's Inferno became known to Venetian Crete at a later time, which would suggest that the wall paintings dated pre-1453 cannot be viewed through Dante's influential lens. But still, St. Francis, one of the most popular and beloved Roman Catholic saints, himself took a stand against corruption in the Catholic Church and its clergy. As St. Francis is important to Crete, we shall come back to him in a little bit. What I'm trying to say is that both Orthodox and Catholic would have viewed hell and its population as a place where sinners and those who did not follow the teaching of Christian beliefs ended for eternity, and hence a place they would have liked to avoid at all costs. So hell must have been a great source for connecting the two different peoples, even if that connection was the desire to stay out of it. Another such connectivity was offered by the ultimate destination, paradise. Again, the Iconography of Paradise would have been equally recognizable to both Orthodox and Catholic. The paradise features the Virgin, Abraham with the righteous souls in his bosom, and the good thief. As all Christians are aware, the good thief is the only human with a guaranteed place in paradise, nobody else's. The choirs of prophets and male and female saints waiting to enter paradise would have been equally recognized by both Orthodox and Catholics. While a number of saints are celebrated by both the Orthodox and the Catholics, there are certainly saints exclusive to either side of Christian divide, primarily the monastic saints associated exclusively with either Orthodoxy or Catholicism. However, for the choirs waiting outside the gates of paradise, there seems to be no such distinction. Roman Catholic saints find their way into the nave, receiving the veneration of the Orthodox. Sorry, I missed a sentence. I'm so sorry. In addition, just like the Western friars found themselves in the fire of Cretan hell, so did exclusively Roman Catholic saints find their way into the nave, receiving the veneration of the Orthodox. And I'm not referring here to St. Bartholomew, who after all is a saint venerated by both Orthodox and Catholic, as we saw. I'm referring to St. Francis, one of the most popular Roman Catholic saints and founder of one of the most powerful mendicant orders, who features in at least 4 Byzantine churches in the central and east Crete, mainly in the former province of Pediada, placed among saints commonly depicted on their walls. These are important connectivities developed between two groups of people with different religious beliefs who were brought up to regard the other as heretical. The representations of such iconography in public religious spaces is strong evidence for a cross-religious connection. In the post-Byzantine period, the rise of the hybrid Cretan icon offers a clear visual manifestation of this development. However, the difference between the two is that the public space would suggest a declaration for both its recognition and social acceptance, which in turn mirrors the living reality in Venetian Crete. While it would be difficult to argue against the existence of cross-connectivities in the late Byzantine Mediterranean, it would be perhaps interesting to assess the level of connectivity with different regions and its rationale. For example, Cyprus, an island which has many a parallel with Crete and with which it also shares a Venetian period, albeit shorter for Cyprus, does not present examples with a representation of St. Francis within a Byzantine Orthodox space. And I would like to thank my dear colleagues Tassos Papakostas and Michele Bacci for confirming this. So if anybody knows different, it's their fault, it's not mine, sorry. It is certainly true that St. Francis managed to capture the hearts of the native Cretans in a manner that sustained the test of time. As the name of the saint, both in male and female form, Franciscos, Francesca, is still attested on the island to the present day. And parenthetically, that's why I said we will come back to St. Francis. It has been suggested that actually St. Francis came to Crete in 1211, a few years after the Venetians established the rule in St. Francis came to Crete in 1219, some years after the Venetians established the rule in 1211. So clearly, it holds still a special place in Cretan heart. Similarly, usurers are included in the fire of Cypriot hell. Usurers are included in the fires of Cypriot hell, but are not identified as zuraris like we have on Crete. Although cross-linguistic loans can be found in Cypriot literature. Again, we heard yesterday an excellent paper by Professor Angel Nicolaou Konari, so I'm not going to go into cross-linguistic loans in Cypriot language at all. I'm avoiding it. Now, to conclude, even minor iconographic details could bear testimony to the elaborate web of connectivities in the late Byzantine Mediterranean. For example, in the Church of St. John the Evangelist in Seli in Rethymnon, which is dated 1411, a group of naked sinners is depicted bound by rope and dragged back to hell by a devil. As Rembrandt has convincingly demonstrated, this is a Western iconographic detail which harks back to French cathedral sculpture. Giotto used this detail in the depiction of hell in the Arena Chapel. You can see that in the bottom left. And more interestingly, it can also be seen in the Hora Monastery, the monumental decoration of which is generally accepted as the epitome of Paleologan art. This Western element made its way into late Byzantine art from the West, in a very straightforward route from west to the capital during a period when the cross-cultural exchanges between the two were intense. Regarding its later finding on Crete, the road that brought it here could have run either via the west or equally possibly by Constantinople. It's well documented that artists from Constantinople came to the island, and at least in one known case, that of the painter Angelos Akotandos, the opposite route was also conducted. We know from his will that he was planning to visit Constantinople before 1453. The significance of this detail, no matter how small, is that we cannot really account for its provenance. Is it either from Western art into Crete or from Byzantine art into Crete? And just that we're clear, this is not always the case. For example, regarding the iconography of the Man of Sorrows, we know that it originated in Byzantium. We know that it crossed over sometime in the West where it was developed further. And we also know that it was picked up again by Cretan artists, considered as a Western influence. So you can see the artistic loop here, which forms yet another manifestation of visual connectivity. To use another Greek expression, the difference is in the detail. Η λεπτομέρεια κάνει τη διαφορά. And Venetian Crete offers a plethora of details testifying to a web of connectivities. The sophistication with which these connectivities are manifested is remarkable. Byzantine art assimilated change, but at the same time managed to maintain its recognizable character in inverted commas and has created something new. In short, by absorbing and reflecting experiences of colonization and foreign rule, Byzantine legacy succeeded in living on. Thank you.
We thank you, dear Angeliki, for sharing us evidence, many evidence about the metaphysical context of Venetian Crete. Thank you again. I think it's time for comments and questions. As for the first to say, that of Charalabos Kotsakoglu. Any questions you have?
I think Marina has her hand raised.
No, I'm not raising, I'm clapping.
Yes. No questions from Marina, I'm sorry.
I can't unclap though, I have some problem.
No.
We have 15 minutes for questions. And yes, and a general and a discussion on any aspect of these papers and of art in general.
We're clearly all very clear, and there are no questions to be asked. We were all very clear.
I have a comment concerning Haris's presentation on Hesychast and Cypriot art. What I would like to say, first of all, I would like to congratulate him for tracing these influences and unpublished manuscripts related to the Hesychast controversy. This is something, this is an area that deserves to be explored further in the future. And we are grateful to the Cypriot Committee for Byzantine Studies for organizing a round table in the forthcoming Byzantine Congress in Venice and Padova, focusing on this particular topic. The echo of Hesychast in the Eastern Mediterranean. There is so much to say about this. We have monastic networks stretching from Slavic lands to the Middle East, including Cyprus. This is something that I think has to be explored more systematically in the future. I think there is a question by Dr. Marina Koumanoudou.
Yes, well. Yes. Well, now I do have a question. I would like to ask Angeliki Liberopoulou about these inscriptions referring to Orthodox Christians. And if I'm right, they are dated at 1357.
They're 14th century, both of them. They are in the north, in the west part of the island, Selino. They're very specific. They say that these churches were paid and with contributions by Orthodox Christian, and they're very specific, these two churches. And I wonder, I'm not sure, I need to do some research. I wonder if it's like the regional, the people in this region digging on their heels because, of course, Paleochora had a major Castellanus present. There was really Venetian authority present there. And I think Selino, either you have churches with a lot of Western influence or churches that you say, no, this is it, we are staying where we are. But it's something I need to explore further. I think it has something to do with the Venetian present on the fortress of the Castellanus.
In terms of it being a reaction to the Venetian?
Yes, yeah.
It's interesting. It hasn't got to do anything with what's happening, I don't know, in the religious domain or...
I don't think so. I don't believe, I mean, I have always argued against it. And as I said, when you have a church where you have St. Bartholomew with his flayed skin, which is clearly Catholic, and I think we have pockets of resistance, if I can say that in inverted commas, but this is, it's just only understandable. This is not, Crete is not white or black.
No.
And it's very complicated. And basically, it's like the rules that prove the exception and the exception that proves the rule in both cases. But this particular two inscriptions in Selino, well, the churches, I've been there, they're just pretty much, they don't differ from any other church. It's just this very specific statement on the inscription. They don't have any other polemic, if that's what you're after.
No, I'm wondering whether if they're before or after St. Tito.
I think there are before St. Tito's, both of them. It's first half of the 14th century. Let me double check. I'm pretty sure, well, actually, I'm afraid, having said that the inscription does not give us a specific date. The style, yes, the one, the Church of the Christ the Savior in the village of Aerini, it's 1357-58. And yeah, and the Church of the Holy Apostles in Prines, which is just around the corner, it's 14th century, no date, because it says here year, and it's just blank, not blank. It's the inscription that doesn't survive.
It's very interesting, though. Very interesting.
Yes, I think so too. But then again, that's my. Yeah, thank you for saying that. I think so too.
Dr. Haralabos.
Thank you. I have a question that has been puzzling me for quite a long time. It is amusing observation for some, but also of historical importance for me. Once I visited an exhibition in Crete with my family and then a young son. We observed something extraordinary in one of the icon, a very large icon by the Maskinos of the Last Supper. And if I can show this to you, it is an extraordinary thing that I have not seen anywhere else. Sorry. Can you see this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is Christ holding a hamburger, or a cheeseburger, rather. Yes, it is extraordinary. If I can make it larger. I'm sorry, I cannot. So this is a kind of bread with something in it. Now, hardly from the other iconographical depictions of the supper, as far as I know. So would any of our experts here would be able to illuminate? And we can see also, of course, the other food and various other items on the table, very realistic. Is this a peculiarity of the Maskinos? Is he following any Western tradition, or indeed Eastern?
Shall I say something about the Maskinos? Although I'm not the expert, it's Professor Maria Kostandaki. Of course, the Maskinos is her baby, and we're pleading with her to publish her 500-page thesis on the Maskinos. The Maskinos is a very exceptional. I have always maintained that if the Maskinos were Italian of the Renaissance, he would have been a famous, world-famous artist. He's contemporary to El Greco. He clearly does the same. He goes to Venice himself because the confraternity, the San Giorgio dei Greci, asks him to go and decorate the church there. That shows how famous he was and how respectable. And we have actually in Puglia the Maskinos' altarpieces in a very Western style. The Maskinos does this and that very well, and he can separate. We have St. Anthony, the monastic saint, completely Byzantine style and character, and then he does the Puglia. Now, this is considered, Haralambe, a Western influenced work by the Maskinos. And you can see, as you say, from the realistic, the wine, the way the wine is depicted in the carafes, in the glasses, everything about this has clearly something which the Byzantine art is not interested, primarily because Byzantine art does not depict this world, it depicts the heaven above. So in short, yes, this is considered one of the Western influences on the Maskinos' exceptional work.
Thank you very much. And now I feel I need to ask you for an oath, to take an oath, all of us, not to reveal this to McDonald's. You can imagine. You can imagine what might happen.
Oh, no, no, no. We cannot do that to the Maskinos. Please, no, 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 absolutely not.
Yes, thank you very much.
Depends on the royalties to be paid by McDonald's, Haralambe. And where that money will go.
No,
we must not sacrifice everything.
The Maskinos is too precious. No, no.
But if it's for a good cause, maybe he would agree.
Yes, I do not. Anyway, another point that I would like to make, but there is Tassos who is before me. Sorry.
Yes, I had a question for Yannis Iliadis, who showed us this very nicely this variety of different types, well, different styles of painting coexisting simultaneously. And thinking about the architecture at the same time as well, can we tell what lies behind this? I mean, is it purely the patron? I mean, can we imagine that it's just a patron who decides, he or she says, that's how I want it to be? Is it a practical question? That's the painter you've got available in your area. You employ him to do it, and that's how he works. Or could there be more behind it, as I try to argue with the architecture? And could there be more conscious, intentional choices there? Or can we not tell?
Thank you, Tassos. Do you hear me? Yes. Thank you very much, because I think that my presentation, my paper comes to complete your paper, because you have presented something very similar. So you presented what happened in the Cathedral of the Greeks in Nicosia. So they tried to make something similar to the Venetian, something similar to the Frankish cathedral that was next to it, something that shows the high-ranking society of the Greek Cypriots next to the Latins. So I think that something similar is happening also in the monuments where this new art is coming, is established. For example, in Lambadistis, probably also in the Cathedral of Nicosia. In Nicosia, we have only one fresco of this period, and it's in the Folk Art Museum today, in the old archbishopric. So I imagine that we have lost a lot of cycles of frescoes, and I think that in the cities we surely had more of these cycles as Lambadistis with the new the Cypriot Renaissance art, and I think that it was something intentional. I have studied this monument in Lambadistis, and I found that there is at least an Italian painter among the Byzantine ones. So we have someone who his style is striking, very different than the rest, and the others that they know the Italian perspective, they have studied, but they had someone who was at least coming from Venetian areas, and he knew the perspective, the way to represent the scorcho from down up, and the taste of the color. It's not something that you can copy to see, for example, an engraving and do it. If you don't study it, if you don't work with it, with someone who knows it, you cannot do it. So I think it was intentional, and probably also it was something similar also in Paphos, as you said about the church. Also the frescoes there are of the same taste, not as high. We don't have an Italian painter in Agios Neophytos Catholicon, but we have also this taste of the new art. I think it was intentional, and it was the desire of the people of Cyprus the Greeks of Cyprus to come in a higher level. So they have people who obtained fiefs and they obtained money, so they wanted to show off also and show that they could do something that they couldn't do before. So this is the new status of the Cypriots of this time. I don't hear.
Mr. Valadis, do you have a question?
Not a question, just I would like to bring to our attention a comment by Professor Konnari on the chat. Zuraris is not used in the Cypriot dialect, but zura, from the Latin usura, phora, is with the meaning of stain. And there is also a question by Charalambos Fontzakoglou to Angeliki Limberopoulou. What are the iconographical elements in St. John the Baptist Church that led you to identify the depicted prelates as Latins in hell?
Yes, I was looking at this actually. I didn't know whether. Thank you, Haralambe, for your question. And also, can I just quickly say about Zuraris, because we have published, as you know, the 2 volumes on hell, which I have here, and Anne-Marie, who did the extensive work on the Cypriot hell, we know, as far as the evidence we have gathered, that there are usurers burning in hell in Cyprus. There are many of them, but they are never called Zuraris. This is we don't have it in the Peloponnese. We don't have it anywhere else. This is very, very typical for Crete. And also, as I said, it's 15 examples of Zuraris, of usurers. 11 of them are called Zuraris. 2, I put it up in the slide, have this tokon lavon, tokon hyperperor.
Do you still use it in the Cretan dialect?
Yes, they do sometimes, but it's a very interesting, and also the way it's actually written in Greek characters. They have taken the word usurer and turned it into Zuraris completely, with the eta, the sigma, in a Greek alphabet, which I think it's, In Cyprus, we do not have that. There's no usurer identified as Zuraris. Okay. So I just wanted to say that. Now, Haralambe, this is an excellent church, the St. John the Baptist. It was actually recovered from the F48 in around 2000 underneath layers of whitewash. And that's why probably it is not well preserved, but the one part of, I have the icon here, so the pictures here, so the one part, we have all the Orthodox, the Arios and all the heretics of the Orthodox faith. The second part, to the left, to the right, there are actually 3 priests dressed in what is probably described as a Franciscan overall, with a big hood and everything. It's clear. I don't think they're Franciscans. I think they're just, but I actually went to, on Crete in Chania, we still have a little church where the Catholics, with a priest and everything, and he's aware of this particular church. I went and talked to him, and actually in order to demonstrate with all the hood and whatever, he actually put on the whole attire and showed me, and we compared him standing there. It was quite an interesting lesson in Franciscan attire. Him standing there and the figure, the fresco. So I'm more than happy to send you the details so you can see what it is. But there are clearly 3 of them standing, wearing what seems to be Franciscan habit. And also they have they're not clean shaven like the Franciscans are usually. They really have as if they're not very well groomed, shall I say. So this is, I would say, beyond doubt that they are supposed to be Western friars. We have at least 13 churches with Western friars in hell, tonsures and everything.
May I ask also something else in comparison to the presentation of Yannis Iliadis? In Cyprus, a place under Venetian dominion in the last 80 years, we have 2 different iconographic trends. or I would say three. One, we have cases with Latin iconography, purely Latin. One, we have, it's a little bit before the Venetian period, this. One, we have the trend that Iliadis showed us, that it's like a traditional Byzantine, post-Byzantine, although with some Western iconographical influences, but it's very Byzantine. And the other one is the Cypriot Renaissance frescoes, as the one of Agios Ioannis Lambadistis, although with very impressive Western influences, but in a doctrinal level, very orthodox, I would say. Why don't we have a similar evolution in Crete, which remained under the Venetians longer than Cyprus? Did you ever think of that?
What do you mean? Sorry, I want to step back. What do you mean by evolution? Because
I mean, we have two trends. One is the Byzantine, to say, trend, and the other one is the more Western, like the Lambadistis.
As Charalambos Dendrinos just showed, I mean, all the Cretan artists are completely bilingual. They can do this. They can do like Damaskinos. He can do something completely Western, and he can do something completely Byzantine. All of them, after 1453, all of them are bilingual. They can do something in the Byzantine style, in inverted commas. This is a long discussion what we mean by Byzantine style. The hybrid icon, whatever. No, they're all of them. They couldn't survive otherwise. The market in
not in frescoes, but not in frescoes.
We don't have frescoes. That's the thing. The frescoes decline. The frescoes decline after 1453. There are two distinct, as I said at the beginning of the paper, Crete has, before 1453, many frescoes. We have 850 churches on Crete. There are too many. After 1453, it's the rise, what I call the rise of the Cretan icon. Socioeconomically, I have published on that. Obviously, I'm not a social historian, but I do believe it's because there is a saturation at some point, and also we see after 1453, after the middle of 15th century, the people from regions move to the cities in on the north coast. Life becomes harder, so they tend to move to the cities of the north coast, and clearly people are not anymore in the regions that much, and just the society and the artistic demand flips. At the same time, of course, due to urban reconstruction and whatever, we do not have anything saved in Chania, Rethymnon, Iraklion, and Lassithi, the main cities. Very little survives. We don't know, what would have been there. But it is true. Crete is a tale of two artistic media, wall paintings and the panel painted icon, which I believe.
Angelikimou, and thank you very much, Charalambos, for this very valuable question and answer that gives also this perspective of your expertise. For us, philologists and historians, this is an eye-opener. I think that we have now reached the last stage. I would like to thank Professor Vafiadis and our speakers for this
welcome.
Very interesting and fascinating session, opening new questions also, new avenues for thought. And may I kindly ask the mind and soul of this colloquium, Dr. Christovalandis Kyriakou, to conclude with some thoughts and reflections on, as Julian Chrysostomidis would have said, what have we learned from this lesson?
So, thank you. Dear colleagues, dear friends, I would like to begin my concluding remarks by quoting the most Hellenistic of all Greek poets, the Alexandrian Constantine Pikavafi. The poem is entitled Going Back Home from Greece, and was translated into English by Edmund Keeley and Philip Sherrard. Well, we are nearly there, Hermikos. Day after tomorrow, it seems that's what the captain said. At least we are sailing our seas, the waters of Cyprus, Syria, and Egypt, the beloved waters of our home countries. Why so silent? Ask your heart. Didn't you two feel happier the further we got from Greece? What's the point of fooling ourselves? That would hardly be properly Greek. It's time we admitted the truth. We are Greeks also. What else are we? But with Asiatic affections and feelings sometimes alien to Hellenism. So Gaddafi's poem is set on a ship sailing in Hellenistic times from mainland Greece to the waters of the Kathimas Anatoli, our east. What Gaddafi discusses in his poem is Greekness, or rather the plurality of Greek identities, creating both a sense of communal belonging as well as sharp distinctions between members of the same broader community. In 1412, Joseph Bryennios, who had been summoned by Emperor Manuel II Paleologos and Patriarch Euthymios II to examine the Cypriot appeal for a confirmation of their orthodoxy by Constantinople, echoed the paradox captured by Gaddafi. Bryennios, who feared that a reunion with the Cypriots would threaten the purity of Orthodox faith, pointed out that not only the Cypriots, but also the Calabrians, the Sicilians, and the Romei of Crete, Rhodes, and Lesbos were expected to become pro-Latin. A few years earlier, in 1406, the Cypriot ecclesiastics, discussing with Bryennios the possibility of a reunion with Constantinople, claimed that the election of the Orthodox Patriarch in Syria was publicly confirmed in a ritual by the Muslim Sultan. Wishing to strengthen their argument that everyday interaction and even co-worship in areas under non-Byzantine rule was inevitable, they also claimed that the Orthodox Patriarch in Jerusalem concelebrated with Nestorians, Monothelites, and Armenians, namely groups excluded as heretical. This anecdote captures the very essence of our colloquium. Is there a place for Byzantium and Byzantinists in the late medieval Mediterranean? And what is Byzantine in a world radically transformed by the increasing fragmentation and disappearance of the once mighty Byzantine Empire? Our gathering has explored these questions both spatially and thematically, bringing together scholars working on different fields and providing a forum for fruitful exchange of ideas and debate. I feel that we have learned many good lessons from each other, even if we do not agree on everything. And this is how scholarship in a democratic environment should be. The main aim of our colloquium was to readdress questions related to Byzantine connectivities, experiences, and identities in Latin and Muslim-ruled areas once belonging to the Byzantine Empire. As mentioned yesterday by Professor Chrysos, the term connectivities is borrowed from graph theory. In Mediterranean studies, connectivities describe physical, political, economic, religious, and cultural networks connecting fragmented geographical areas. So inviting scholars to present case studies on different forms of connectivity without encouraging a uniform modus operandi has enabled us to appreciate the variety of bonds restoring the unity of the fragmented late Byzantine world. What follows is a brief outline of the colorful threads waving the late Byzantine Mediterranean tapestry. First, political ideology and allegiance. Beginning with Professor Evangelos Chrysos' masterful definition of the Byzantine concept of ecumenicotita, not to be confused with the Latin cosmological notion of universalitas, we saw how Manuel II Paleologos employed strategies of adaptability in order to save his declining empire. Professor Vlada Stankovic then placed under the microscope kinship networks shaped by Roman political allegiance and Orthodox faith, highlighting the ability of Byzantium to include heterogeneous ethnic groups through the interconnection of basilia and ecclesia. Professor Efiragia's examination of Byzantine historical memories of Laskarid and Paleologan rule in Asia Minor enriched our colloquium by concentrating on a geographical area of the utmost importance for late Byzantium and by analyzing political myth-making. Professor Ilias Giarenis' paper turned our attention to the antagonism between the Laskarids of Nicaea and the Republic of Venice, arguing that the Aegean heartland remained essentially a Byzantine mare nostrum, at least in the 13th century, early 13th century. Jack Dooley's exciting paper on the Frankopoli brought to the fore the progenies of mixed marriages between Greeks and Franks, stressing the elements of diversity and inclusivity in Paleologan society. Now, the second element of connectivity is related to faith and ecclesiastical institutions. Professor Kostas Konstantinidis offered a valuable survey of interreligious relations between Greeks and Latins in Cyprus, describing the transition from open resistance to accommodation and peaceful coexistence. Our intellectual journey then continued with Professor Ioannis Palic and his illuminating paper on the supra-regional spiritual radiance of the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Jerusalem during the 13th and early 14th centuries. Still on the Holy Land, Professor Andrew Njotitsky shared with us his findings on the 14th century refounding of the monastery of St. Efthymios, generously supported by the Emperor of Trebizond, an oft-ignored patron of Orthodox Church and culture in this period. Dr. Marina Koumanoudi offered fresh evidence on the instrumentalization of identities in 15th century Venetian Crete through a fascinating court case involving a family of Cretan peasants and the legacy of Byzantine canon law, accepted by the Venetians as local customary law. Dr. Charalambos Kontzakoglou's recent findings on the echo of Hesychas in Cypriot art invites a closer examination of the largely unexplored dynamism of Byzantine Orthodox ascetic practices and culture in Cyprus during this period. Lastly, my own paper on the reception of Latin rule in the Eastern Mediterranean by colonial and post-colonial historiographies focused on the models of segregated or integrated societies, suggesting that symbolic boundaries and multiple identities could provide a more accurate and comprehensive view of religious conflict and symbiosis. The third element of connectivity is culture. By presenting the formation of the medieval Greek Cypriot dialect under the Franks and the Venetians, Professor Angel Nicolaou Conary traced the role of language in the shaping of group identity and its failure to reach the status of a lingua sacra. Dr. Tassos Papakostas' paper interpreted the complexities posed by the appropriation of rural and urban ecclesiastical architectural memory in 16th century Cyprus, a world placed, as he describes, beyond the Crusader states after the Byzantine Empire within the Venetian State on Damar. Dr. Ioannis Iliadis presented the creative transformation of the island's Byzantine painting in the 16th century, functioning as an artistic koine in dialogue with the achievements of the Italian Renaissance. Last but not least, Dr. Angeliki Limberopoulou guided us to our final destination, hell, or to be more precise, depictions of hell from the churches of Venetian Crete, addressing the shared anxieties and expectations of both Orthodox and Latins. To return to my initial question, is there a place for Byzantium in the late medieval Mediterranean? Let me paraphrase Cavafy. It's time we admitted the truth. We are Romei also. What else are we? But with Eastern and Western affections and feelings, sometimes alien to Hellenism. So what is the next step forward? As our colloquium has made clear, there is an urgent need for discussing in depth the terminology employed in our research. For example, national identity, ethnicity, or genos, and group names such as Greeks, Greki, Romei, Rum, Byzantines, Uniates, or Eastern Catholics. And echoing Achilleas' remarks yesterday, we need always bear in mind that these terms will have been used differently in the past, assuming in some cases that they were used at all. What I would like to repeat is that we need to be critically reflexive about the methodology and sources we employ, as well as about the potentials and limitations of our perspective. Standing on the shoulders of giants is both a blessing and a curse, especially if these giants had a different worldview than our own. To put it rather provocatively, let us ask ourselves, are we really interested in the people we study? Or to quote the Anglican priest and theologian Christopher Bryan, quote, are we actually trying to listen to their experiences, their aspirations, and their questions in all their complexity as they understood them, so as to see what implications they might have for us, possibly implications that we did not expect? Or are we approaching them with our agendas, our concerns, seeking to use them for our purposes, defining them in our terms, fitting their perceptions of their situations to our perceptions of our situations, and so, in effect, colonizing them, looking to them only for the loot that we may bring back from them to our own intellectual metropolitan center, unquote. I leave this as an open question. The quest for truth goes on. I believe that our colloquium has been a fitting tribute to the loving memory of two great explorers of historical truth and the broader late Byzantine Mediterranean, Spiros Vrionis Jr. and Elizabeth Zachariadou. Their contribution was presented yesterday by Professor Stephen Reiner, to whom we are deeply grateful. May they rest in peace, and may they guide us with their light in the same way that Stella Maris, the Star of the Sea, guided medieval navigators. I am pleased to report that we intend to publish a volume with the papers of this colloquium together with other papers in the future, and the speakers will be receiving the details in due course. On behalf of the co-organizers of our colloquium, I would like to express my deepest thanks to the Institute of Classical Studies, our host and sponsor, and especially to Professor Catherine Harlow and Ms. Valerie James for all their valuable help and support. Dear Valerie, thank you very much for your patience during the last 2 days. So I'm most grateful to the co-organizers of this colloquium for their support and fruitful collaboration. Dr. Charalambos Kontzakoglu, representing the Society of Cypriot Studies and the Cyprus Committee for Byzantine Studies. Dr. Achilleas Hadjikyriakou, representing the Center for Greek Diasporal Studies at Royal Holloway. Jack Dooley and Dr. Charalambos Andrinos, representing the Hellenic Institute of Royal Holloway. I would also like to express my deepest thanks to the speakers and moderators of the discussions, and to all of you, our friends and colleagues, who joined us and offer your thoughts, questions, and suggestions. Thank you very much.
Let me, as being the most senior here in our group, I'm already 84. Congratulate Hadjivalandis and all the team for this wonderful conference. Thank you very much indeed, Hadjivalandi. You are a golden Valandian.
And you are also a golden mouth and gold in your heart, Professor Chrysse. You are always guiding us with your wisdom and with your experience and kind advice from the very inception, in fact, of this colloquium. And I would like to express the gratitude of all of us, of the whole gathering. Now, we have a little present for you in the voice of Achilleas.
Angeliki wants to say something, I think.
Yes.
No, I don't want to say. Sorry, sorry.
So, Achilleas.
Accident.
I don't have any gifts to offer, and especially after the spectacular finish of this colloquium by Chrysovalandis. I really enjoyed the closing remarks, and I echo his critical perspective on and the value he puts in meaning. Let it be historical, let it be sociological, let it be artistic. Thank you, Chrysovalandis, for all the collaboration, and thanks all co-organizers and our host for this opportunity. So what is Charalambos referring? And I promise I won't take more than 3 minutes of your precious time. We are already overdue. Is to respond actually to the last comment, if Byzantium is relevant and how we see things from this retrospective historical perspective. I think it is, because, and I had to bring in a more contemporary perspective now, because what we are focusing on is more on the 19th and 20th century at the Center for Greek Diaspora Studies. But one of our initiatives actually discuss very similar categories of analysis, the issue of connectivities, of boundaries, of identities, and also how this is being reflected and discussed in different disciplines within humanities, social sciences, and arts. And I'm really proud to mention this on behalf of our consortium that we've put together a creative call commissions, and we found funding to support 3 projects that discuss diasporic identities through the academic perspective and the artistic perspective. So we intend to bring together, and we have these projects are already in development, artists and academics that both embrace the complexity of communities away from home, of group identities or multiple identities, and we cross these disciplines and we cross sectors. And this Creative Commissions call will culminate with an exhibition at the Cyprus High Commission next month. I'm happy to share in the chat the link to our event at event. Right, I would do it.
Thank you very much, Achilleano. And
okay, I'll put in the chat later on. Just to say, yes, thank you very much. And we do embrace the complexity. We shouldn't be afraid of it. We try to build bridges. We try to create dialogues. And we are up to the challenge of bringing up even controversial issues are not, once we are honest about the questions we set, we will receive appropriate answers. And that's all.
Thank you. In the best tradition of Spiros Vrionis and of Veta Zachariadou, as Pierre Nora said, and memory dictates and history writes. With our best wishes, our warm thanks to all, including the Professor Antonis Anastasopoulos, representing the Center for Asia for Mediterranean Studies of the University of Crete, who is responsible also for the fellowship for Veta Zachariadou, as I mentioned yesterday, and I do thank him for attending our colloquium. So, αιωνία τους η μνήμη, να τους θυμόμαστε με αγάπη και με θαυμασμό και με μεγάλο σεβασμό. Thank you very much. Καλή αντάμωση. So long for our next stop in our journey. And again, our grateful thanks to the Institute of Classical Studies